In the 1970s, Detroit was still the heart of the global automobile industry. Millions of cars rolled out of its factories every year. For decades, the world drove vehicles built in the Motor City. Steel mills, smokestacks, and networks of conveyor belts stretched across the horizon in Detroit's industrial heart. The River Rouge complex stood as the largest integrated automobile plant in the country. Here, raw ore arrived by ship and rail, disappearing into blast furnaces that glowed day and night. Molten steel poured into molds, cooled and rolled out as sheets destined for stamping presses within the same vast footprint. Every stage of production, from metal to finished car, unfolded under one roof, a feat unmatched anywhere else in America. At full capacity, the Rouge employed more than 45,000 workers, operating in shifts that kept the machinery running around the clock. The scale was staggering. Each year, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler together produced nearly 9 million vehicles, with the Rouge itself turning out hundreds of thousands. Aerial photographs from the early 1970s reveal a sprawl of buildings, rail yards, and docks, all orchestrated to keep the assembly lines fed and moving. Gate 3, a landmark for generations of workers, saw thousands pass through daily, their routines dictated by the relentless pulse of the factory's schedule. Henry Ford II, grandson of the company's founder, spoke of stewardship and ambition. He called the Rouge the engine of progress, insisting that innovation and scale must go hand in hand. His vision for the company was rooted in the belief that control over every step, from raw materials to finished product, was essential for survival and growth. This philosophy shaped not just Ford's operations, but the entire city, as the Big Three's massive plants set the rhythm for Detroit's economy and daily life. The integrated design of the Rouge allowed for efficiency on a scale few could imagine. Steel flowed directly from the mill to the body shop, where presses shaped panels in seconds. Finished bodies moved by conveyor to paint booths and engine bays, each step carefully timed and measured. The result was a system capable of producing cars in numbers that defined an era, anchoring Detroit's reputation as the world's motor city. Pressed steel panels thunder down the line, each one shaped in a matter of seconds by towering hydraulic and servo presses. Operators load punch tape programs into the machines, the holes in the tape dictating every movement, die stroke, dwell, and release, while the presses stamp out fenders, doors, and hoods at a rate of 75 panels per minute. The rhythm is relentless. A finished car body emerges every 3 seconds, a cadence that echoes through the vast halls of General Motors' Fisher Body and Ford's Rouge complex. Above the roar, a Honeywell Series 200 computer monitors conveyor speeds and press cycles. Introduced in 1973, this early computer regulates the flow, shaving seconds from each cycle and keeping the line's heartbeat steady. Supervisors check printouts as the system adjusts for load and timing, narrowing the margin of error to half a second. The body line itself is a ballet of steel and sweat. Panels meet, sparks fly, and resistance welders clamp down, fusing metal with pinpoint accuracy. 6-axis robotic arms, still in their infancy, handle tack welding and door installation on select lines, their movements precise but always overseen by human hands. Bodies glide forward on conveyors, passing through paint booths where electrostatic sprayers coat the metal in a fine mist. The Honeywell console calibrates oven temperatures, ensuring each layer dries perfectly. After paint, cars enter the leak test cell, a pressurized chamber where water jets search for the smallest flaw. Sensors track pressure decay. If a leak is detected, an alarm sounds and the body diverts to rework. Quality assurance is not just a checkpoint, but a ritual. As one line supervisor put it in 1974, "Our goal is to keep the human touch at the finish line, even as computers dictate tolerances upstream. Every step along the line blends automation and expertise. The machines set the tempo, but the worker's eyes and hands catch the subtle imperfections a sensor might miss. By the time a finished body leaves for the next stage, it has passed through 1,000 coordinated actions, each one timed, measured, and quietly essential to the making of Detroit's cars. In the showrooms of the 1970s, Detroit's creations stood bold and unmistakable. Chrome gleamed from the flanks of Chevrolet Impalas, Ford LTDs, and Chrysler New Yorkers, their long hoods and sweeping fenders announcing American confidence in every line. These were the cars that filled suburban driveways and city streets alike. Full-sized sedans with wide bench seats, V8 engines, and a scale that declared abundance. In television commercials and glossy magazine spreads, the Big Three promised luxury, power, and durability. Their marketing spoke of family road trips and the freedom of the open highway, but also of status. Owning a new Pontiac Grand Prix or a Dodge Monaco meant joining the mainstream of American prosperity. Yet beneath the surface of tradition, a restless energy pulsed. The muscle car era was still alive in models like the Chevrolet Camaro Z28 and the Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, machines built for speed and spectacle. Even as the first murmurs of change reached Detroit, engineers and designers doubled down on boldness. Vinyl roofs, hidden headlights, and opera windows became signatures of the age. No figure captured this spirit of ambition more than John DeLorean, General Motors' charismatic vice president of engineering. DeLorean's public persona, sharp suits, and a shock of silver hair matched his appetite for reinvention. He championed lighter materials and advanced engineering, pitching a vision where performance and efficiency could coexist. In a 1976 television interview, DeLorean spoke of reducing weight by 30%, promising a new era of American cars that would lead, not follow. For a moment, the Motor City's pride was on full display, embodied in the machines and the men who built them. Shift whistles sound before sunrise, and the city stirs to life with their call. Workers file through factory gates, lunch pails in hand, as the day's first shift replaces the night crew. These routines shape the rhythm of Detroit's neighborhoods. Children walk to school as parents head to the line. Corner diners fill with regulars ordering coffee and eggs before the clock-in bell. The hum of conversation mixes with the clatter of plates and the rustle of newspapers, all timed to the factory schedule. Inside the plants, the United Auto Workers Union stands as a constant presence. Bulletin boards display notices about overtime, safety briefings, and cost of living adjustments called COLA that help protect paychecks against inflation. The union's strength is felt not just in negotiations, but in daily life. Stewards settle disputes on the floor, and union halls double as gathering places after hours. The memory of Walter Reuther, who led the UAW until his death in 1970, lingers in the stories told over coffee and at union meetings. His vision of solidarity and fair wages set the tone for a generation. When Leonard Woodcock took over as president, he brought a quieter, more pragmatic approach, steering members through an era of uncertainty and compromise. Factory cycles reach far beyond the gates. Paydays support local businesses from hardware stores to barber shops. When overtime is plentiful, shops along Michigan Avenue thrive, and when output slows, the mood across entire blocks shifts. The city's pulse is measured in shift changes, contract talks, and the steady hope that tomorrow's whistle will sound right on time. In October 1973, Detroit's certainty was shaken as the world oil market convulsed overnight. The price of gasoline, steady for years at 36 cents a gallon, shot up to 64 cents within months. Headlines warned of rationing and long lines at filling stations. For the first time, car buyers hesitated before choosing a V8. GM's internal memos from early 1974 revealed a 12% drop in V8 sales, a jarring reversal for an industry built on horsepower and size. Federal action followed with the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975. Automakers now faced a new target. Every company's fleet had to average 18 miles per gallon by 1978. The challenge was immediate. Engineers scrambled to cut weight, shrink engines, and rethink decades of design. John DeLorean, then GM's vice president of engineering, called weight reduction a necessity, not a luxury. Meanwhile, Japanese imports, once a minor presence, gained speed. In 1970, foreign cars held just 7% of the American market. By 1979, that number had climbed to 12%, with Toyota, Honda, and Datsun leading the charge. American showrooms, once dominated by the big three, now made space for smaller, more efficient models from overseas. The Motor City, long accustomed to setting the pace, found itself reacting to forces beyond its borders. Each new headline, every shift in the showroom, signaled that Detroit's dominance could no longer be taken for granted. Detroit's factories once defined an era shaping lives and skylines on a global scale. Today, as automation and new industries redraw the city's future, the legacy of that industrial might endures. What Detroit built still echoes, reminding us how innovation and upheaval remain inseparable. Thank you for watching.